So let's get started here. So as I mentioned, welcome to Waymark's April 2020 webinar. Today's guest is Stuart J. He is the founder and president of Capital Analysts Network, Incorporated. He has 42 years of continuous Washington experience, including 16 years as a congressional legislative assistant and legislative director, an administration appointee, and a registered lobbyist. During his service on Capitol Hill, Stu was the senior legislative assistant to a number of members of Congress, including Dan Quayle and Jack Kemp. He served as a he served in the Reagan administration and was vice president in a prominent lobbying firm where he represented foreign heads of state and Fortune 500 companies. In 1993, he began his consultancy to institutional investors, specializing in federal political risk management. So bottom line is that's pretty much Stu's career is in federal political risk management. And he's going to spend a good chunk of the webinar talking about that, and most specifically, how the elections happening in November of this year, November 2020, will actually impact your portfolio. So welcome, Stu. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Good day, everybody.
Okay. Couple housekeeping items. So one, we expect the presentation to be about 30 to 45 minutes. After that, we'll have some questions and answers, and we hope to finish this up within an hour. If you do have any questions, feel free to click at the bottom of the screen. There should be a section that says Q&A or questions and answer or ask questions, something like that. I'm not exactly familiar with how it looks on your screen, but if you do have a question on anything that Stu says, please feel free to ask it. We are going to hold the actual answering of the questions till the end, so Stu can get through his presentation. And then one final thing with the presentation is I don't actually have a disclosure slide, but of course, when it comes to anything that we say here, it's all general in nature, and please make sure that you don't take any actions based on any Stu's comments or any of my comments, frankly, just based on the content of this webinar. So let's get started. And before we jump into Stu's conversation about Washington and the November 2020 election, we got to talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is COVID-19, and how that's dominated the headlines. February 19th, which seems like it was eons ago, was when the market hit its all-time high. And since February 19th of this year, markets have come down in a crashing fashion, in a historic drop, and pretty much bottomed out at the end of March. And since that time, from the beginning of April 2020 till today, the markets have staged a pretty nice recovery. But we aren't back to the February 19th level. So with all that said, Stu, any comments on this? I know you and I talked about this last week when we were preparing for this presentation, but any comments on COVID-19 and how that's impacting people's portfolios, specifically, any kind of, I know I don't want to put you on the spot and make you a prognosticator and say, we're going to be out of this at this time, but what are some of the things that you're thinking about as it pertains to the virus and how it affects people's portfolios?
Well, there are obviously some very key things we have to do to get out of trouble. What are people watching? Well, people are watching the rate of new infections daily, and what we're finding is that the new infections are plateaued. They've yet to decline. We're running at about 30,000 new infections a day, which unfortunately is about where we were 3 weeks ago. So the sad thing is that we are not yet where we want to be in terms of seeing a national decline in the infection rate. Now, I like to quote Mark Twain. I inject a little humor here. It is a grim situation, but it's important to remember what averages mean, and they can be deceiving. So Mark Twain once said that a man who has his left foot in a bucket of ice cubes and his right foot in a bucket of hot coals is on average comfortable. And so what's really happening with COVID-19 is that there is a raging volcano infection in New York City, in New Jersey, and some hotspots around the country, including Boston, Miami, Chicago. But elsewhere in the country, there has in fact been a very steep decline in the rate of new infections. And so it's really a tale of two cities or two different nations. If you're in a hotspot, right now it's terrifying, and you don't understand the conversation about reopening the government. But if you are, and opening the stores rather, opening up the society again. But if you're in part of the country where COVID-19 never really struck with ferocity and the case level is low and heading lower, you're wondering what the big deal is. So this is, I guess, kind of the reason why we're getting this very different reaction, depending where you are in the country, to let's get going, to no, don't you dare, we're all going to die if we don't. So it is a mixed bag out there. But of course, to fully turn the page, we do need to get the national rate down, not just the parts of the country that are becoming increasingly comfortable and wondering what the deal is. We've got to lick the New York City problem, the New Jersey problem, the Boston problem, the Miami problem, because people leave these areas and can reinfect us all. So watch the national rate of new infections. That's the best indicator of where this is heading in terms of the spread of the virus. Right now it has plateaued. It is not coming down yet. So there is on that score, we may be getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. The second thing of what Washington's looking for is, let's assume we have succeeded in turning the corner, and we're going to reopen the country. How do we avoid having a second wave hit us in the fall? And we're going to need to be able to isolate people quickly, identify them quickly if that happens, and that's all about testing. And so what's going on with the testing rate? Well, if you have to watch one person in all this, watch Scott Gottlieb, who actually is on CNBC every day, late in the afternoon, early evening, the former FDA commissioner. He believes that we need be able to test about 500,000 people, give or take, per day to guarantee that we can, in fact, identify new cases quickly and find their contacts quickly, and therefore isolate people quickly, and so that we can snuff this thing out. So people.
And where are we right now, Stu?
Well, the best guess.
Just for context.
The best guess are about 250,000 a day. I mean, give or take.
So we're about halfway there.
About halfway there. That's an improvement. About 3 weeks ago we were running 150,000. 4 weeks ago, 150,000. So they're hoping to get up there by the end of May, early June. They hope to actually hit that number, but we've heard a lot of promises, and what you want to do is see reality. There are different websites that are fairly easy to find that track daily testing or cumulative testing, and you can track this yourself if you're trying to follow this as well. Realistically, rather than listening to talking heads tell you what's happening, just do your own watching. Finally, the other.
And do you have any of those just for the audience, Stu? Well, any that you use?
I use the COVID project, COVID project.com. Is probably the single best site that I would recommend. You can also watch the Johns Hopkins USA page, which is widely watched. That will also give you a lot of information.
That's the one I use.
Yeah, but you might check out the COVID project as well, Brendan, and see what you think.
Okay.
I find it. Finally, what we want and need is 100,000 people hired to do contact tracing. So let's assume we get the number of new infections down to something nowhere near 30,000 a day. Let's suppose we get down to 1,000 a day, which is where you want to be ideally. Well, you want to have enough people calling all their contacts, every day to find out who else they knew and saw in the last 2 weeks. They want as many as 100,000 people to do that. So I would track that as well. When we can test 500,000 people a day, and we have 100,000 people to do contact tracing, and we've got the number of cases down to around 1,000. We're done with this virus, okay? We're pretty much home free. We can contain it, and we can more or less go about our business with as long as we're careful.
All right, Stu, I'm going to put you on the spot. So what are your thoughts, timetable, on all that happening?
It is not possible to say. I mean, the surprise has been that we are not falling on, we're not coming down as quickly as other nations. We're looking more like Europe. You know, China, it rose like a rocket and it fell like a rocket, and we were all hoping for that.
I'm going to put air quotes around that, though. China's data might not be the most reliable.
Well, that's true, but you know, it's clear that they were able to basically reopen their country. They certainly have not been telling the truth in many ways. I agree with that for sure, but it is a fact that when their cases came down sharply, maybe a fibbing or outright lying how many they had, whatever the real number is, it went up and it went down. It went down rapidly. And that gave everyone optimism. We're not there yet. You know, right now we're plateaued. So new cases, we're running at 30,000, give or take, for the last 4 days. That's not where you need to be. So
yeah, I will say that that just to jump in real quick on that, that I do, I half jokingly say that, with the air quotes, one of the things that you can kind of take to the bank is the American companies that reopened. And, the Starbucks of the world, the McDonald's of the world, they actually did reopen in China, pretty consistent with what China was reporting in terms of, their rates coming down. A company, especially a capitalistic company like McDonald's or Starbucks, would not reopen unless those numbers really were as down as sharply as they purported.
Absolutely. So let's move on to actually what this means for the economy, and then let's start talking some politics.
Got it.
So I'm a little more pessimistic than others about how fast we're turning the corner on the virus, but on the economy, it's actually the news on the other side. It's better than expected. Yesterday or over the weekend, the Congressional Budget Office released their bipartisan forecast of what they're thinking. And I guess you could call this, the good news is the bad news could have been worse. But they're predicting on the second quarter of this year that the unemployment rate will average 14%. And normally when you hear that number, you would say, I cannot believe how bad that is. That's a terrible number. And it is. It's the worst unemployment rate since the Great Depression. But people were banding about numbers like 20%. As a forecast, 15 to 20% is what they're expecting, and the high teens, the average forecast by many economists. And the bipartisan Congressional Budget Office is projecting it's going to be only 14%. In terms of the downturn on GDP, real GDP was also coming in at a lower rate of decline than people were fearful of. We were hearing numbers like 20% decline in GDP, and it looks more like 12. So, it's kind of a little bit of black humor. The good news, the bad news could have been worse. But markets, of course, move on expectations. And I think some of what this is my opinion, some of what we're seeing in the rally the last couple of days, I think, is the Congressional Budget Office telling people the economy is not as bad as people were led to believe. And you see this in other kind of sophisticated numbers like the VIX came down a lot. The so-called fear index fell precipitously yesterday. It's almost though people are starting to kind of a sigh of relief. They see the light at the end of the tunnel. There's more optimism about the economy and about the markets. So I'm a little not as optimistic about the speed with which we're going to recover from the virus. The economy is starting from a better situation than people thought, and overall that makes people more optimistic, I would say, about the market.
Got it. Let me just jump in real quick on that, just as a couple clarifiers there. One of the things that I've talked to a lot of my clients about is that the economy and the stock market don't necessarily move hand in hand. which, there's all sorts of different ways of looking at that, but there's a emotional element to it that sometimes the market gets overblown and, gets way too negative than really what it should be. And the other piece of it is that the market is always forward thinking. It's predicting what's going to happen in the next 6 months, not, oh my goodness, the market or the economy just, fell on hard times, so therefore the stock market's going to go down right there with it. So there is kind of a decoupling between what the stock market does and what the economy actually does. And I think, Stu, what you were just saying a moment ago is spot on, is that when it comes to the markets and, what happened between that February 19th where we hit the high and the end of March where we bottomed out, there was just so much pessimism of doomsday scenarios of what was going to happen, and the market fell as a result of it. And I think what you're pretty much referring to, that the rally between the end of March till today, is that now that the numbers are actually starting to come in, there was an over exaggeration of how bad it could be, and this is now kind of pulling it back to it's in essence a recalibration of what people's expectations were, and that's why we're seeing a recovery.
Yes, I agree with that. My last comment was merely the last 48 hours. I think can be explained to a certain degree by the CBO telling us that it's even better than we thought, or it's less bad than we thought. Mm-hmm. More of the same idea.
Okay. With that said, again, just to cover yours and my behinds, Stu, we still expect there to be more volatility. And that this is not going to just be, a nice, beautiful recovery that we're not going to see any hiccups along the way. So, what I've been telling a lot of clients that I've gotten on the phone with and spoken to about is that we should expect kind of a W-shaped recovery where you kind of go down sharply, come back, but there could be another down, there could be another up, could be down before we finally get that full recovery that everyone's been looking for. And I think both Stu and I are going to be very vague in how long we think that W will take to get back to the February 19th highs that we saw just two short months ago.
I'm not making any forecasts on either. I'm really pointing to what the Congressional Budget Office is saying. Personally, I don't know if we're going to have a V-shaped recovery or an L-shaped recovery. It could be bad or it could be better than expected. The jury's just out. Who knows? The jury is out. I just think it's interesting that the Congressional Budget Office is more optimistic than the consensus, and they're probably the best in the business. So I think that's very interesting that their starting point's more optimistic than others. Not my forecast, their forecast. Their starting point's better than expected.
Okay, sounds good. Any other comments before we shift to your presentation?
No, not for me.
Okay, sounds good. So let's get going. Stu, you're on. This is where Stu really shines. He knows Washington well. So go for it, Stu.
First of all, just a quick comment. Yes, my background is in Republican politics, but I've been advising institutional money managers and others across the spectrum for 25 years. So I learned a long time ago to leave my personal politics out of my forecasting. It's a good way to, and I'm not, having many clients, is using your own biases to make forecasts. So this is not a pro-Trump point of view. This is not a pro-Trump point of view or a anti-Trump talk. It's just what I think is going to happen talk. So let's just start there. I think Trump's got maybe a 55% chance of being reelected, which is actually not very good for an incumbent president. 2/3 of incumbent presidents who run for reelection win. So he is not the most popular of incumbents. And this is showing up, in contemporaneous polling. Joe Biden is in fact beating him in the head-to-head polls 48-42 right now. So if we voted today, he would be a former president. Joe Biden would be elected. Now we've also learned that it's very important to look at state information. As we know, both George W. Bush and Donald Trump did not get the most votes on election day, yet they took the oath of office. So It's important to keep track of electoral college and specifically the key states that are going to decide this, which are states like Wisconsin and Florida. And when you look at those data, they back up the national polls. Joe Biden is beating Trump head-to-head in Wisconsin. There was a poll out today having him beating him in Florida, which is typically a redder state than Wisconsin. So again, right now, Joe Biden is beating Donald Trump. Now, of course, we're not voting today. And the incumbency has a big advantage. So we'll just wait and see. I would put my feather on the side of the scale of Trump making it back, but it's not because I'm a Republican. It's just because usually incumbents somehow figure out a way to win. And Trump has the advantage of not even need to getting the most votes to get back at the presidency. As we learned in 2016, he got 2 million votes fewer than Hillary Clinton. So he doesn't even need the most votes to be reelected, just like he won the first time. Now, what I think Trump is up to in managing this virus and the economy is he is trying to play the role of optimist. America loves it best when our leaders are optimistic, when the whole mood of the country is grim, horrible, everyone's losing their jobs, we're losing friends to the virus, our wealth is declining in the stock market, we're wondering if our houses are going to lose value, we're shut in, we can't see our kids and our grandkids, and we can't see our friends, and it's really, really difficult. It's good to have the leader of the country exude a positive spirit. And that is what he's trying to do. Now, he's telling some things have turning out not to be true. But for a whole month, I would say the country was optimistic because we thought that hydroxychloroquine was going to save the day. And it took a month for us to learn that's probably not the case. It's probably not going to be a magic bullet. But who wasn't taking solace from thinking, oh, gee, there is something out there that's going to save us? Remdesivir was out there and still out there. As maybe that's what's going to save us. And so he talks up these things. There is a cure. We are going to solve it. And does he know? I don't think he does. But that's what he's trying to do is just project being an optimist and be an optimist all the way through the election. And when the virus is in our rearview mirror and we're worrying about the economy, he's going to say, man, we're going to get back. Look at these split. It's all going to be great. Look how many people are getting hired, and it's all going to come back together. America, we're going to be better than ever in just a few short months, and he'll be talking up the recovery and doing everything he can to get us all optimistic again. If he can keep that up, he's got a big advantage. Okay, if the facts on the ground support a reasonable amount of optimism, yes, we're still here. The economy is back. People will forget many of the reasons why they dislike Donald Trump if you're in the middle. Now, the people who don't like him are never going to like him. The people who like him now are still going to like him. It's the people in the middle that are going to decide this thing. They're going to remember that. They're going to remember that he guided us through a national nightmare with optimism, and we came out the other side. That's really what his strategy is all about. Now, in terms of getting into more of the nitty-gritty, it's going to be a race also between mobilizing two very large constituencies. Maybe the best thing to do is to turn to the next slide, I think, if someone's controlling the slides. So I've broken the electorate into 5 easy pieces. The biggest one is whites who didn't graduate from college. That is Trump's base. They were 44% of the electorate last time. If you look over to the side there on the first line, you'll see that Trump got 37.9 million votes from this group. Hillary Clinton got 19 million. So he carried this group by a difference of 18.9 million voters. What Trump's going to want to do is get as many whites who did not graduate from college out to the polls, because they like Donald Trump by a margin of 2-1. This is the only group of the 5 that actually likes him, approves of him. So if you wonder why Donald Trump talks the way he does and acts the way he does, it's all about maximizing his popularity with this group, which is last time was 45% of the electorate. He'd like nothing more than for this to be 50% of the electorate. If he gets anywhere near that number, he will be reelected. Now, if you look at the next line, you'll see that 30% of the electorate are whites with college. Now, they're fairly closely divided, 43 for him, 50 against him last time. Because they're closely divided, they produced a margin of only 3 million votes for Hillary Clinton. As a group, they're actually not that consequential. I'm a member of that group. Half of my friends think Trump's good, half of them really dislike him. But there's no point in trying to mobilize them because there's not a lot of advantage in doing that for either side. Now look at the next group, African Americans. They're only 12% of the electorate, but because they are so united in their views in favor of the Democrats, they voted last time 8-88 for Hillary Clinton. They actually supplied 13 million votes for Hillary Clinton. Now look at the difference there. Look at the margins that were supplied by Hispanics. Well, they gave her 4 million. Asians and others, 1.6 million. What stands out is mobilizing two groups. Donald Trump will try to mobilize whites that never graduated from college, and Joe Biden will try to mobilize the African American community. And here you have to say that Joe Biden's got quite an advantage in doing this because Barack Obama is going to be out there very aggressively campaigning in the African American community for Joe Biden. They already like Joe Biden a lot. That's why he's the nominee. On Super Tuesday, he ran up the score huge with African Americans. And you put Barack Obama on the road in Milwaukee, you put him in Tallahassee and Orlando and Miami, you put him in Philadelphia, you put him in Detroit, the key states here, and he will energize that community. Michelle Obama will go with him, or maybe she'll split up and they'll hit these states simultaneously. There will be an Obama blitz. It will work. So Trump does have his work cut out for him. It's going to be a fierce struggle. It will not be pretty. I'll remind you of the last race. If it were just a referendum on Donald Trump, he would lose. Most people disapprove of Donald Trump as president, and that's been the case since the day he took office. Trump wants to turn it into a choice, just as he did with Hillary Clinton, saying it's not me that you have to decide on, it's am I better than the other guy? And that standard he thinks is easier to overcome, and he's right. So the Trump campaign will do their best to make Joe Biden look like he's unqualified to be president, that maybe he has a touch of dementia, that he's just not strong enough to hold the reins of power in dangerous times. They'll trot out all of his gaffes. They will try to dirty him up with being a little too touchy-feely with women during his lifetime. They have video of that. They will try to say that he's corrupt with all the business about his son. I'm not opining whether or not any of this is true. That's not what politics is about. It's about what you can convince other people is true, not what the actual truth is. Perception is reality in politics. Reality is not reality. This is what he's going to try to do. And they're going to dirty up Joe Biden and say, which of these two bad choices, you guys in the middle, are you less uncomfortable with? Just like last time. So it's not going to be pretty. I view it as a toss-up election. Let's go to the next slide if we can. So if you want to just keep track of where we should be focusing our energy, the states in yellow are the ones that are the Trump will be and Joe Biden will be focusing on. These are the pivotal states. The new addition is Minnesota. Interestingly enough, Minnesota usually thought it was a very reliable blue state. It came within 1.5% or so of giving the victory last time to Trump. And the Republicans actually picked up seats in the blue wave in 2018 in Minnesota in the House. So you have to add Minnesota as a possible target for Republicans and Donald Trump this time. Democrats like their chances in Arizona and North Carolina, and they even see an opportunity to punch through in Georgia. So if you basically focus on these, 8 states, keep track, you will know how the election is going. Do not pay attention to national polls. You know that's not who picks the presidents. It's going to be these 8 states. Try to keep track with the polls in these 8 states. Okay, let's move on to the next slide if we can. All right, now, of course, November, we're not going to be picking just the president. We're going to be picking our Senate, and we're going to be picking the House. Now, this cycle, many more Republican seats are being defended than Democratic ones. And so there's a lopsided opportunity for Democrats to gain seats in the Senate. And I'm reflecting that here with this map. There are 6 Senate seats where Democrats have a good shot at taking the seat. Some of them better than the others. I'm showing that on my slides here. Cory Gardner's view is already defeated in Colorado. Martha McSally in Arizona is in terrible trouble. And Susan Collins, interestingly enough, in Maine is in a lot of trouble. But you put it all together, you have who's going to decide this? Well, it's probably going to be Tom Tillis's race in North Carolina and Steve Daines' race in Montana. Republicans start with a 53-47 majority. So Democrats need it to gain absolute certainty that they have control. They're going to need to gain a net 4 seats, and they're going to lose Alabama. So you can do the math of how far down this list they have to go to seize control of the Senate. But I give the Republicans only a 60% chance of holding on to the Senate because what has been happening in American politics is very interesting with swing voters. Increasingly, swing voters are not ticket splitting. If this year they decide they're going to vote for the Democrats for president, then they're going to vote for the Democrats for the Senate, and they're going to vote for the Democrats for the House. If they're going to vote for the Republicans for the president, then this year they're going to vote for the Republicans for the Senate, and Republicans for the House. It lines up almost 80% correlation now. It used to be like 55%. At each cycle, the swing voters are no longer, increasingly not splitting their tickets. They're voting a unitary ticket, just switching which direction they go. And so this is taking winner-take-all politics in the House and the Senate and creating increased volatility in the election. So despite the fact that Republicans hold a 53-47% majority, there's a 40% chance that Democrats win the presidency, take the Senate, and keep the House, which means you would have, come January of next year, you would have liberal government taking over Washington, D.C. And you can predict certain things from that. Maybe it's good for the country, maybe it's bad for the country. That's up for you to decide. But one thing seems quite likely we would see is a corporate tax increase because Joe Biden wants to take away the corporate tax cut that the Republicans gave, raise the tax rate from 21 to 28%. If you think that the stock market reflects after-tax cash flows, which I do, that probably means there's a 10% risk to the markets of Joe Biden, and if he wins and the Republicans lose the Senate, and the markets figure it out, the market's going to have a new obstacle before it goes back to those February highs, which is having to absorb the expected corporate tax increase you can assume would happen in 2021. They will have the votes to do it. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Now, let's suppose the opposite. Let's suppose that Donald Trump is successful and framing the election as a successful commander-in-chief who guided us through terrible times, a once-in-a-century pandemic, the worst recession since the Great Depression, and those swing voters reward him for his optimism and what they perceive to be steady leadership of, got us through all this. Well, there's enough firepower for Republicans to actually take back the House. And they will need 18 seats to do that. To put some context on that, Democrats in the last election won 40 seats. So Trump only needs to gain back half the seats that Republicans lost in just the last election. And all these 40 seats, they're obviously freshmen, new to their territories. They're not well-entrenched incumbents. So if Trump gets, well, I believe is something like 49% of the two-party popular vote, I don't think he even needs a majority of the popular vote. I think Republicans would probably take the House back. And one of the reasons for that is the maps that were so favorable to Republicans as a result of the 2010 census are still in effect one last time. The Republicans were successful in gerrymandering all of Pennsylvania, all of Ohio, all of Michigan, all of Wisconsin, all of Florida, Texas. And so in 2016, Republicans held the House of Representatives comfortably. They didn't get the most votes for the House of Representatives. More people voted for Democrats for the House than they voted for Republicans. But when you went by race, the Republicans kept their majority with something like 230 seats. So Trump runs around 49% in the two-way race, 49-51. He might, just like last time, come back and be president. And Republicans might take the House, although they didn't get the most votes, just because of these maps. And one more last time, they've got the gerrymandered maps. What does that mean? Well, then you're going to have all conservative government, because if Republicans capture the House, if the swing voters, that meant on that last slide, they tipped the balance with all those Republicans are narrowly in trouble. A lot of them make it back. They keep the Senate. Maybe they lose one seat, certainly not 3, 4. And you've got conservative government. And now Donald Trump thinks he's got a mandate. He's got unified government. And you've got all conservative government. And he's going to pursue a pro-business point of view, more corporate tax cutting, probably more incentives, bring back manufacturing from China. You can already hear the drumbeat. And there's probably going to be an upward movement in the stock market. I'm not saying this is good or bad for the country. That's for you and me to decide in the voting booth. The markets will probably assume it's helpful. So this makes this election one of the riskiest for investors in my lifetime. Not only do we have to navigate a once-in-a-century pandemic, and we have to figure out, are we going to have a V-shaped recovery or an L-shaped recovery? We have to figure out, is this country turning leftward or rightward? And this decision is going to be made by the country in just a few short months. And there can be tremendous volatility here, depending on what happens on something like a national debate. We'll all watch it in real time. Does Donald Trump say something so offensive that it costs him the election? Does Joe Biden stumble when he talks and convinces people, yes, there's something there, and he's not up to the job? We'll see it in real time. It's remarkable how much risk there is from politics. In the 40 years I've been doing this, I've not seen the level of this risk my entire time in Washington. Okay, maybe we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, give me 1 second here.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. So what does this mean? Well, how would I personally invest funds? What am I suggesting people to do? Well, I tend to pick themes. I try not to get into the weeds and pick individual companies. Leave that to the experts like you. But what's happening in Washington? We know the 5G theme is going to be a strong one coming from Washington. This is a global contest between the United States and China, or more broadly, the West versus China. Whose technology is going to be used to build out 5G globally, and all the spin-off applications to 5G.
So for those of us who don't know what 5G is, that's pretty much a cellular phone internet band that's supposed to promise, extremely high speeds, and therefore result in all sorts of new technological innovation.
Yes, I mean, there's some hyperbole here, but it's probably not off by much to say that the speeds of our internet will go up by a factor of 40, mind-bogglingly fast internet. And it's going to make possible things that we couldn't do before. It's going to start with driverless cars. It's going to make driverless cars possible. Maybe it will take us 15 years to be well on our way to having that fully phased in. But driverless cars are possible when cars can talk to each other at blindingly fast speed, computer to computer, without human intervention, and make accidents a thing of the past. The Obama regulatory team predicted that the accident rate would fall by 94% when we had driverless cars as a reality. It's probably going to fall by more because they didn't know about 5G when they made that forecast. Virtual reality is going to be a big deal under 5G. If you always promise your significant other you're going to take him or her to Venice, you'll be able to sit in your living room and put on a realistic set and press the Venice button, and you will be walking down the streets of Venice and looking at all the beautiful things there. You want to go to Mount Kilimanjaro before you die? You can't make it there. Anyway, virtual reality will be something else we'll be hearing about courtesy of 5G. Remote surgery. You have a child who needs surgery in Saskatchewan, Canada, and they don't have the cutters there who can skillfully stitch this child back together. If they can get him to the operating table somewhere in Saskatchewan, it may be a surgeon, a Mass General, who stitches them up remotely. That will be a realistic thing to do using 5G. We will all come to think of this as quite natural, just the way many of us think of hailing an Uber now is quite natural. That was not possible until we had 4G. There are going to be all sorts of spin-offs. So 5G is a theme that's going to be with us for a good long while. There's security aspects of this. The Chinese control it. They'll be able to snoop on people globally. It's a big security risk. Democrats and Republicans are united on this here in the United States. Nancy Pelosi was actually in Europe lobbying the Europeans not to adopt the Chinese standard. As you must gather, the Chinese star globally is dimming because of how they handle this crisis. So this is making their lobbying efforts even more successful with European publics. I think this is a place to be, regardless of probably who wins the election, but certainly if Trump wins it. My theme on utilities is basically, under Donald Trump, you can assume that the green energy idea is dead, and he's the most pro-fossil fuels president I can think of. Everyone remembers his T-shirt that says "Trump digs coal." Well, he wants get the country moving again. Utilities are a pretty safe place to be if we have an L-shaped recovery. Just people will be looking for dividends. Safe place to be, in my opinion. Washington's going to, the regulatory environment's going to be friendly to utilities. So that's some kind of the ideas there. On infrastructure, well, this is going to be happening under either president. But we got low interest rates down around 1 or 2% on the 30-year bonds. My goodness, well, we have a multi-trillion deficit of needs in rebuilding our roads and bridges. It makes absolute complete sense to finance this as cheaply as possible with 20 and 30-year debt when they're basically giving you the money for next to nothing to finance 20 and 30 and 50-year assets that actually do improve the productivity of our country. This isn't giveaways to constituencies you don't like. These are things that you and I take, roads we take every day. We see these potholes. We see this congestion on our major highways. We lose a lot of time on the roads. Our system would be much more efficient if we could do this. Both parties agree. They've agreed for some time. The problem has been figuring out how to pay for it. Excuse me. In this environment, unfortunately, in some ways, it's not an obstacle. We're just going to put it on the credit card. And it kind of makes some sense if you're thinking about cyclical needs of getting the unemployment rate is 12% or 10%. You still need to get that unemployment rate down. It may take a year or two to get an infrastructure program actually up and running. We know there are not a lot of quote shovel-ready projects, but what we could do is start the ball rolling here, maybe even this year, and have some of those projects up and running by the middle of next year. And so this is going to be a theme you can count on. We're going to have an infrastructure bill, regardless of who's going to be president. Timing to be decided later. Just watch this space. National defense. Well, obviously, Republicans, if they certainly control all the Congress, we know where they are in defense, which is that they think that we need to be increasingly wary of the Chinese. We have to worry about the Russians. We have to worry about North Korea. We have to worry about Iran. We continue to need to rebuild our military and take care of business here. It's a sustained theme regardless of who the Republican president is. And you can, with a Republican Congress, Trump will get his way. Pelosi has been saying yes, but we'll give you some of what you want, but you have to give us what we want. And there's been haggling and reflect the domestic needs that the Democrats want. And so, for good or for bad, if you had an all-Republican government, that obstacle would be removed, and Trump would get his way on defense.
Hey, Stu.
Yes, sir.
Just in terms of time-wise, right now we're at about 48 minutes, and I just know that I'm looking at my list of participants, and I know that there's some of my more actively interested in politics type clients. So I'm sure there are some questions. So why don't we do this? I'll let. I think there's one slide after this. But in the meantime, if people can start using that question and answer button at the bottom of the screen, start putting some questions up, and I'll start compiling them while Stu finishes up the presentation.
Okay.
But keep going, Stu.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. Well, let's basically, I'll pick up the pace here. Obviously, you can imagine what Trump's going to be thinking of China when we turn the corner and we don't need China's help to get through the infection. Something like 75% of the country now has a negative opinion of China. There's quite a consensus on this. So he will be able to take an even tougher line on the Chinese import situation. So anyone who's exposed to that through supply chains needs to think that through carefully, what that means, because one way or the other, those supply chains are going to be attacked. And be careful there. Google and Facebook, well, these are perennial targets of Republicans. They think that they are liberal platforms. When we're no longer talking about the virus, we're going to go back to talking about the things we were talking about before the virus. And attempts to regulate Google and Facebook are going to accelerate once again. So be careful about owning these. If you don't have a view on this, there might be reasons to still own Google and Facebook, but be wary of the regulatory risk involved. Okay, let's move to let's call it the Biden slide. Obviously, different priorities. We have a Democratic Congress, Democratic president. You can certainly make money with Democrats in power. Conservatives who foolishly set out the Obama years learn to regret that. So, as I said, I am ecumenical on this. This is where I would be putting bets if you see Joe Biden win. Biden wins, he's probably going to have the Senate. You certainly have the House. Green energy is going to be a theme. They will be finding ways to end the fossil fuel era faster than perhaps would otherwise happen. Wind energy, solar energy, efficiency, smart grid, all the themes of sustainability would be in vogue, and they would have the votes to push them through. Cannabis, the country is now in favor of recreational legalization of cannabis. The speed with which this change has happened is startling, but it's a fact. One would imagine that a President Biden would finally act on this, and at minimum, repeal the major federal impediment to this, which is rules against banks financing growers and retailers of cannabis. This is why we don't have a domestic legal cannabis industry. It's largely because banks are afraid of being seized if they finance this activity. That could change, and that would be sufficient to stand up a domestic cannabis industry here in the United States. You should watch that. The consumer staples theme, very briefly, that's, again, if we're in a slow recovery and we're talking about that corporate tax increase, maybe consumer staples make some sense. U.S. bonds, if the recovery is going to be a little slower than otherwise expected because of that tax increase, you're going to want U.S. bonds, may be a good place to hide until we get together momentum and gain power. Infrastructure we talked about already. Over on the bearish side, well, we know what Democrats are thinking about healthcare. They want to make progress towards single payer. Biden is an incrementalist. When he sat down with Bernie Sanders, they agreed to push for Medicare for 55 and over. That's going to be the Biden position in this election. That's clearly not good for things like health insurers. They're going to lose customers. Big tech, it's interesting. They too are not big fans of Google and Facebook. They've got an agenda to rein them in. Larger banks, one of the surprises from 2008, 2009 is that the 4 largest banks in the country have a larger share of domestic deposits now than they did then. So too big to fail was a problem then. It's an even bigger problem now. And Democratic regulators, led by Joe Biden, will do what they can to make that smaller. So I'm not a fan of owning large banks, assuming a Democratic win here. The other 3 industries at the bottom are small niche things. Many investors don't play these areas, but I put them there for completeness. Okay, so because I took more time than I expected talking about the virus and the economy, I think I should stop there and thank people for attending and listening. I wait for your questions.
Great. Okay. So again, as I mentioned, anyone who has a question, feel free to ask it. Whether you use the chat feature, there's a chat feature at the bottom. There's also that I see it as Q&A at the bottom of my screen, but I do have a couple questions for you, Stu. So you ready?
Yeah.
All right. First question: how much does Biden's running mate affect his chances of winning? And a little bit more specifically, what if he chooses a woman?
Well, this is a popular question, but it's and my answer displeases almost everybody. It doesn't matter. It matters very little. At least in terms of winning the election. If you actually study this, it's difficult to find an example in all of American history, certainly in modern American history. Picking the vice president has resulted in any state switching towards that party or away from that party. People vote for president. They don't vote for vice president. Now, the best example that people can find, maybe, just maybe, it made a difference, and people will debate this till cows come home, is maybe JFK picking LBJ in 1960 swung Texas. Nobody knows for sure. But the question is not, does it matter? Of course it matters in different ways, but in terms of actually determining the outcome of the presidency, I don't think it does. It matters, however, in the event that we have the unfortunate circumstance, of course, that Joe Biden were to pass away. That's going to be a thought in people's minds. It should be about Donald Trump as well. We've got men in their late 70s running against each other. We would like to believe that the person that Joe Biden picks is going to be capable of governing in the unfortunate circumstance that he could not carry on. And in that context, that's important, certainly. And I guess another way it's important is more in the following sense: is that we take the measure of a man or woman, whoever the nominee is, of their decision-making capability by who they pick as their running mate. This is one decision where it's you alone as a candidate get to decide. No one else can interfere with you. You can have 3 months to. In Joe Biden's case, he's got 3 months to decide who he wants to pick. He will hire the vetters. He will interview the candidate. And does he pick a choice that stands up well under scrutiny? Or do he pick a bad choice? It took some of the wind out of the sails from Papa Bush when he picked Dan Quayle. I remember that. Now, this in the very beginning, the first 72 hours, when John McCain picked Sarah Palin, that put wind in his sails.
That's the one that I was thinking about.
Yeah, so you can get some buzz, and if you're behind, you may have to throw the long ball and try to change the subject. But in the end, it really doesn't matter. It's something that the talking heads.
Okay, I actually did get a follow-up question on this one, and the question is, but in this election, where there is some question about Biden's faculties and whether or not he'll 4 years into it turn into kind of like a Ronald Reagan, year 7, 8? Is that choice of running mate that much more important?
Not much. 80% of the electorate, let's just start, are so partisan, they would vote their party no matter who the nominee is. So what we're really talking about is the 20% in the middle. What do they think about all this? And if I have one thing to share with people, that's the takeaway: is stop debating your ideological opponents. You're never going to change them, and they're never going to change you. Love them for who they are. If they're your friends, your family. Stop talking politics, because all it's going to do is divide you. But anyway, and we who are stuck in our ways, D or R, I love you both. We're not the ones who decide. It's about 20% of the voters who decide. And what do they think about all this? Are they terrified of Joe Biden being incapacitated? Well, maybe, just maybe, this time it does matter. It's we will probably hear some polling on that and see if it matters. Historically, it's not mattered. Vice presidency is not who people vote for.
Got it. Okay, let's do one more question. We have about a minute left. So anyone else have any questions? I do have one more question, but I just want to, and this is more me personally than anything else, but anyone else have any questions before we jump into that final question? All right, since I don't see anything, and if someone does jump on, then I'll change. One of the things that I was always kind of schooled on and told to remind myself about is when it comes to things like this, Trump's key states and what races to actually pay attention to. The poll, there are a lot of polls that are going to be flying around, and really it's for clicks and eyeballs and things like that. But the most important ones to think about are likely voters who are actually going to be part of these things. So like if they just say, number of people who are going to vote for Trump or going to vote for Biden, you almost want to throw that one out the window. But if it says likely voters who are actually going to, because again, this graphic here was really eye-opening to me, that of the voting public, 74% are white. I thought it would be a whole lot more. So that actually kind of opened my eyes. So, the real important thing is likely voters, not necessarily the public at large.
Oh, that's definitely true. I mean, the absolute worst poll is a poll of all adults, because only 60% of the people vote who are eligible to vote. So if you get 40% of your sample, people who never vote, it doesn't matter. It includes an all-adult poll will include resident aliens who are not yet qualified to vote, maybe illegal aliens that better not vote. And it includes registered voters who actually don't intend to vote. So the absolute worst poll of all is an all-adult poll. The next poll that is, somewhat better is a registered voter poll, these are typically what we see right now. And then the best is the gold standard, our likely voter polls. And this is where the secret sauce of the pollsters matters, because there's a lot of skill in discerning whether or not the person you talk to actually is going to show up and vote. And a good likely voter model will certainly start with the basics, which is, did you vote the last 3 elections? If you did, then we're score you as a likely voter. How do we score somebody who's voted 2 of the last 3 elections, and who say they're going to vote? So there's a lot of artistry that goes into even that. And so different pollsters might say this guy's a likely voter and this one's not a likely voter. So there's some skill. And finally, just to underline it, you want a likely voter poll, not of the whole country, but of Wisconsin, likely voter poll of Florida, likely voter poll of Pennsylvania, Michigan. That's the absolute, you boil it down to its absolute essence. That's what you want to watch.
Got it. Okay. Well, we're at the 1 hour mark, a little bit over. So, Stu, again, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to join with us and share your wisdom. And with that said, I'm going to bid everyone goodbye, and hope everyone's staying safe.
Thank you,
Thanks
Brad.
again.